John Harper lived a quiet life in a small town surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods. He was a man of simple habits, known for his kindness and dedication to his family. His world revolved around his daughter, Emily, who was the light of his life. At just 16 years old, Emily was wise beyond her years. She had an insatiable curiosity about the world and a knack for observing things others often overlooked. Her favorite hobby was writing, and she poured her heart into a leather-bound diary that she carried with her everywhere. The diary wasn't just a notebook, it was Emily's sanctuary. It held her deepest thoughts, her wildest dreams, and even her fears. Some days she would write about school, her friends, or the books she loved reading. Other times she would pen heartfelt letters to herself, imagining what her future might look like. On difficult days when life felt overwhelming, she used the diary to process her emotions. For John, it was comforting to know that Emily had such a safe space to express herself. He admired her creativity and often encouraged her to keep dreaming big. But fate can be cruel and sometimes happiness is fleeting. One fateful evening, everything changed. Emily came home from school complaining of a headache and feeling unusually tired. At first, John thought it was just exhaustion from her busy schedule. But over the next few days, her condition worsened. She developed a high fever, and no amount of rest seemed to help. Alarmed, John rushed her to the hospital where doctors ran countless tests. Days turned into weeks as they tried to pinpoint the cause of her illness. But the answers remained elusive. Despite their best efforts, the doctors couldn't save Emily. Her body succumbed to a rare and aggressive illness that left medical professionals baffled. When the news broke, John's world shattered into pieces. The vibrant, lively girl who once filled their home with laughter was gone, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Life without Emily felt empty, meaningless. Every corner of their house reminded him of her favorite chair by the window, the sketches pinned to the walls, and the faint scent of lavender she always wore. In the days following her death, John struggled to come to terms with his loss. He replayed memories of Emily in his mind, trying to hold on to every detail, but nothing could ease the ache in his chest. Friends and neighbors visited to offer condolences, bringing casseroles and kind words, but their presence only highlighted how alone he felt. No one truly understood the depth of his pain. How could they? Emily wasn't just his daughter. She was his entire universe. As the date of Emily's funeral approached, John found himself grappling with how to say goodbye. He wanted to honor her memory in a way that reflected the person she was, a thoughtful, creative soul who valued self-expression above all else. That's when he remembered her diary. It had been her constant companion throughout her life, a repository of her innermost thoughts. Placing it in her coffin felt like the right thing to do. After all, it was hers, it belonged with her. On the morning of the funeral, John retrieved the diary from Emily's room. Holding it in his hands, he traced the worn edges and flipped through its pages. Each entry brought back vivid memories. The time she wrote about winning an art competition, the day she confessed her fear of growing up too fast, and the countless musings about her aspirations. Tears blurred his vision as he placed the diary gently inside the coffin, tucking it beside her folded hands. Standing there, looking at her peaceful face for the last time, John whispered softly, "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you, sweetheart, but I promise I'll never forget you." His voice cracked under the weight of his sorrow, but he forced himself to stay strong. As the lid of the coffin was sealed shut, he felt a piece of his heart being buried along with Emily. The ceremony was somber yet beautiful, attended by friends, family, and classmates who shared stories of Emily's kindness and humor. People spoke of how she lit up any room she entered and how her smile could brighten even the darkest days. John listened quietly, nodding occasionally, though he barely registered their words. All he could think about was the emptiness waiting for him at home once the service ended. When the final prayers were said and the mourners began to disperse, John lingered by the gravesite. Watching the coffin descend into the earth was excruciating, but he stayed until the very end. He refused to leave until the grave was completely covered, unable to bear the thought of leaving Emily alone. By the time he finally walked away, night had fallen, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Driving home, John felt numb. The house greeted him with the same eerie stillness that had haunted him since Emily's passing. He wandered aimlessly from room to room, searching for anything that might fill the void. But nothing could replace the warmth and energy Emily had brought into their lives. Eventually, he collapsed onto the couch, clutching a photograph of her in his trembling hands. Sleep eluded him that night, as it had every night since her death. Instead, he stared out the window, watching the moonlight dance across the trees. Weeks passed after Emily's funeral, yet John Harper found no solace. Grief clung to him like a shadow, following him wherever he went. The house that once buzzed with laughter now felt suffocatingly silent. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window seemed louder than before. It was as though the absence of Emily had amplified everything else, leaving John raw and vulnerable. At first, he tried to distract himself by keeping busy. He cleaned out her room, folding her clothes neatly into boxes and organizing her books on shelves. But the more he tidied, the more he felt like he was erasing her presence. Each item he touched carried a memory. The sweater she wore on her 16th birthday, the sketchbook filled with half-finished drawings, the playlist she left open on her phone. These remnants of her life were both a comfort and a torment, reminding him of what he'd lost. John began visiting Emily's grave regularly. At first it was just once or twice a week, but soon it became a daily ritual. Sitting beside the headstone, he would talk to her as if she could hear him. He told her about his day, shared stories from their past, and even joked about silly things they used to laugh at together. Sometimes he brought flowers, other times he simply sat in silence, letting the weight of his emotions wash over him. On particularly hard days, he cried openly, not caring who might see him. The cemetery became his refuge, a place where he could be close to Emily, even if only in spirit. As time went on, however, John noticed something unsettling. His grief wasn't fading. Instead, it seemed to grow heavier, more consuming. He couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't done enough for Emily, that somehow he had failed her. This thought gnawed at him relentlessly, haunting his waking hours and invading his dreams. Night after night, he dreamt of her, always reaching out to him but never quite close enough to touch. In these dreams, she looked sad, almost pleading, as if trying to tell him something important. When he woke up, the sense of urgency lingered, making it impossible to ignore. One evening, while sitting alone in the dim light of his living room, John made a decision that would change everything. He realized he needed closure, not just for himself, but for Emily. He wanted to see her one last time, to hold her diary again and read the words she had written. Maybe, he thought, revisiting her final thoughts would help him understand what she had been feeling in those last days. Perhaps it would give him some peace. The idea of exhuming her coffin terrified him, but the need to reconnect with Emily outweighed his fear. He convinced himself it was necessary, telling himself that this act wasn't disrespectful. It was an act of love. After all, he reasoned, the diary belonged to her, and if anyone deserved to have it, it was her father. With trembling hands, he began researching how to proceed legally, knowing full well that disturbing a grave was frowned upon. Yet the more he thought about it, the more determined he became. When the day finally came, John stood at Emily's gravesite under the cover of night. The air was cool, and the moon cast long shadows across the cemetery. His heart raced as he knelt beside the freshly turned earth, clutching a small shovel. Each scoop of dirt felt heavier than the last, guilt mixing with anticipation. As he worked, memories flooded his mind, memories of happier times when Emily was alive, laughing and running through the fields behind their house. Tears streamed down his face, blurring his vision, but he didn't stop until the coffin lid was exposed. Taking a deep breath, John pried open the casket, bracing himself for the sight of his daughter. What he saw next shocked him to his core. The coffin was exactly as he had left it months ago. Emily lay peacefully, her features serene, untouched by decay. But the diary, The diary wasn't closed. It was open, resting on her chest, its pages fluttering slightly in the breeze. John froze, his blood turning cold. How could this be? He distinctly remembered placing the diary inside the coffin with care, ensuring it was securely shut. Trembling, he reached for the book, flipping through its pages. To his horror, the entries weren't Emily's handwriting. Someone, or something, had written new messages in bold, jagged strokes. The ink was fresh, still glistening under the moonlight. One page read, "You think you buried me, but you buried something far worse." Another warned, "Find me before I find you." John's hands shook as he turned each page, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Panic set in as he realized these writings couldn't possibly belong to Emily. They were too sinister, too menacing. Who or what had written them? And why? Questions swirled in his mind, but there were no answers, only a growing sense of dread. The peacefulness of the cemetery vanished, replaced by an oppressive heaviness that made it hard to breathe. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the wind carried whispers that weren't there before. Forcing himself to focus, John carefully placed the diary back inside the coffin and resealed it. He covered the grave quickly, his movements frantic, desperate to leave the eerie scene behind. But as he drove home, the image of those cryptic messages burned into his mind. Sleep eluded him that night, and when he finally drifted off, his dreams were plagued by visions of Emily standing in a dark forest, pointing accusingly at him. Her voice echoed in his ears. "Dad, you opened something you shouldn't have." The next morning, John knew he couldn't ignore what he had discovered. The diary was no longer just a keepsake. It was a mystery, one that demanded unraveling. Driven by equal parts fear and determination, he resolved to dig deeper into Emily's life, hoping to uncover clues about the strange events surrounding her death. Little did he know, this quest for answers would lead him down a path darker and more perilous than he could ever imagine. The discovery of the altered diary left John Harper shaken to his core. For days, he couldn't shake the image of those cryptic messages scrawled in fresh ink across Emily's pages. Words like, "You think you buried me," and "Find me before I find you," echoed in his mind, gnawing at him relentlessly. Who or what had written them? And why had they chosen Emily's diary as their medium? These questions consumed him, leaving little room for anything else. Determined to make sense of the impossible, John decided to retrace Emily's final months. He hoped that by piecing together her life before her illness, he might uncover some clue about the strange events now haunting him. His search began in her bedroom, a place he had avoided since her death. The thought of stepping inside felt invasive, as though he were trespassing on sacred ground. But he reminded himself that this wasn't just curiosity, it was necessity. If there was any chance of understanding what was happening, he had to confront the past. As he entered the room, the familiar scent of lavender lingered faintly in the air. It was bittersweet, evoking both comfort and heartache. John sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the walls adorned with her sketches and photographs. Her personality seemed to radiate from every corner, the colorful fairy lights strung above her desk, the stack of novels piled neatly on her nightstand, the dream catcher hanging by the window. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and got to work. His first task was to comb through her belongings systematically. He started with her desk where she spent countless hours writing and drawing. Pulling open the drawers, he found loose papers, pens, and old homework assignments. Nothing stood out initially, but then his fingers brushed against something unusual, a small, hidden compartment beneath the desk's surface. At first glance, it appeared seamless, almost invisible, but upon closer inspection, he noticed a tiny groove along the edge. Using a butter knife from the kitchen, John carefully pried the compartment open. Inside, he discovered another journal, one he hadn't known existed. This one was smaller and more worn than the leather-bound diary he placed in her coffin. Its cover was faded, its pages yellowed with age. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him, surprise, guilt, and a pang of betrayal. Why had Emily kept this second journal hidden? What secrets did it hold? Flipping through the pages, John quickly realized this wasn't just another collection of musings or daily reflections. The entries were darker, more urgent. In stark contrast to the optimistic tone of her original diary, these writings revealed a side of Emily he hadn't seen or perhaps hadn't wanted to see. She described feeling watched as though someone were following her everywhere she went. One entry read, "I can feel eyes on me even when no one's around. It's like a shadow is creeping behind me, waiting for the right moment to strike." Other entries hinted at paranoia and fear. She mentioned hearing whispers late at night, seeing figures darting between trees near their house, and having vivid nightmares that left her drenched in sweat. In one particularly chilling passage she wrote, "I don't know who to trust anymore. Not Mom, who passed away years ago, not Dad. He wouldn't believe me anyway. Maybe it's all in my head, but it feels so real." John's hands trembled as he continued reading. He felt a mix of anger and sorrow. Anger because he hadn't noticed how troubled she had been, and sorrow because she had clearly been suffering, in silence. How could he have missed the signs? Had he been too preoccupied with his own life to truly see hers? But the most disturbing part came toward the end of the journal. Emily mentioned confiding in a close friend named Sarah about her fears. According to her entry, Sarah had promised to help her investigate the source of the strange occurrences. Together, they planned to document everything, hoping to prove that Emily wasn't imagining things. However, the last few entries abruptly stopped, leaving many questions unanswered. What had happened to their investigation? Had they uncovered something dangerous? Desperate for clarity, John tracked down Sarah, who still lived in town. When he arrived at her doorstep, she greeted him cautiously, her expression softening when she recognized him. After exchanging pleasantries, John explained why he was there, showing her the hidden journal. Sarah's face turned pale as she skimmed through the pages, her hands shaking slightly. "She told me about this," Sarah admitted quietly. "We were trying to figure out what was going on, but we didn't get very far." "What do you mean?" John pressed, leaning forward. Sarah hesitated before speaking. "Emily believed something or someone was targeting her. We thought it might be connected to the cemetery near your house. There are old legends about it being cursed, but we never really believed them until—" Her voice trailed off. "Until what?" John urged. Sarah swallowed hard. "One night we went there to look around. We didn't find much, but Emily swore she saw something moving among the graves. She said it felt evil, like it was watching us. After that, she became obsessed with finding proof, but then she got sick and—" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harper. I should have done more to help her." Her words sent chills down John's spine. Could the cemetery be linked to Emily's mysterious illness and the bizarre messages in her diary? As he thanked Sarah and headed home, his mind raced with possibilities. Was it possible that the cemetery harbored something malevolent? Something that had latched onto Emily and now refused to let go? Back at the house, John began noticing strange occurrences. Lights flickered. Without explanation, doors creaked open on their own and faint whispers echoed through the halls late at night. At first, he dismissed these incidents as coincidences or tricks of the mind brought on by exhaustion. But the frequency and intensity of the phenomena grew, making it impossible to ignore. Objects moved inexplicably, a vase sliding across the table, a chair scraping backward despite no one touching it. Even the temperature in certain rooms dropped suddenly, sending shivers down his spine. One evening, while sitting in the living room, John heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but gradually it grew louder, a low, guttural whisper coming from the direction of Emily's room. Heart pounding, he grabbed a flashlight and cautiously approached the door. Pushing it open, he scanned the room, expecting to find an intruder or some rational explanation. Instead, he found nothing. But the whispers persisted, swirling around him like a ghostly wind. Frightened yet resolute, John realized he couldn't face this alone. Whatever force was tied to Emily's diary and the cemetery was beyond his understanding. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. The next morning he visited the local library, poring over books about folklore and supernatural legends. Eventually he stumbled upon a name: Margaret Ellis, a historian specializing in paranormal activity. When John contacted Margaret, she agreed to meet him at the cemetery. Armed with knowledge and determination, John prepared himself for whatever lay ahead. Though fear gnawed at him, he clung to the hope that solving this mystery would bring him closer to Emily, and perhaps finally give her peace. Little did he know, the truth would be far darker and more complex than he ever imagined. John Harper arrived at the cemetery early in the morning, clutching a folder filled with notes and photocopies of Emily's hidden journal. Margaret Ellis, the historian specializing in paranormal phenomena, was already there waiting for him. She was an older woman with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through people, and her calm demeanor put John slightly at ease, though not enough to quell the unease gnawing at his insides. As they walked among the weathered gravestones, Margaret listened intently as John recounted everything he had discovered: the cryptic messages in Emily's diary, the strange occurrences at home, and the eerie connection to the cemetery. Margaret nodded thoughtfully, her expression grave. "Cemeteries like this one often carry stories we don't fully understand," she said, her voice steady but tinged with caution. "This place has a long history, much of it dark. People have whispered about curses here for generations." She led him deeper into the cemetery, pointing out faded headstones and explaining their significance. According to local legend, the land where the cemetery stood had once been sacred ground, a site used by indigenous tribes for rituals and ceremonies. But when settlers arrived centuries ago, they desecrated the area, building their own burial plots over the ancient grounds. Over time, tales emerged of restless spirits and vengeful entities tied to those who were disturbed or wronged. As they approached the section where Emily was buried, Margaret stopped abruptly, her gaze fixed on a particular headstone nearby, one that looked older and more weathered than the others. The inscription was barely legible, but John could make out fragments of words etched into the stone: accused, witchcraft, executed. "This is Mary Blackwood," Margaret explained, her tone somber. "She lived in the late 1700s and was accused of witchcraft during a wave of hysteria similar to what happened in Salem. Unlike many accused women, Mary didn't confess to save herself. Instead, she cursed the town before she was executed, vowing revenge on anyone who dared disturb her resting place." John felt a chill run down his spine. Could this be connected to what was happening now? The timing aligned eerily. The supernatural. Events began shortly after he exhumed Emily's coffin. Had disturbing the grave awakened something tied to Mary Blackwood's curse? Margaret continued. "Legends say her spirit never left this cemetery. Locals believe she haunts these grounds, seeking vengeance against those who trespass. If your daughter's diary became a conduit for her energy, it's possible she latched onto it, or worse, onto you." The weight of her words hit John like a punch to the gut. He had unknowingly opened a door to something far beyond his comprehension, and now it threatened to consume him. Determined to protect Emily's memory, and perhaps even save himself, he asked Margaret what could be done to stop it. "There's a ritual," she said hesitantly. "It involves cleansing the space and banishing the entity back to where it came from. But it's dangerous. You'll need to confront whatever force is tied to Mary, and there's no guarantee it will work." Despite the risks, John agreed without hesitation. He couldn't let fear paralyze him, not when Emily's soul might still be caught in the crossfire. Together they prepared for the ritual, gathering salt, candles, and herbs traditionally believed to ward off malevolent spirits. Margaret also instructed John to bring something personal of Emily's, an item imbued with love and positivity, to serve as a focal point for channeling protective energy. That night, under the cover of darkness, John returned to the cemetery with Margaret. The air was thick with tension, and every sound, the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, felt amplified. They set up near Emily's grave, arranging the candles in a circle and sprinkling salt around its perimeter. Margaret lit the candles one by one, reciting incantations in a language John didn't recognize. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows across the tombstones, creating an atmosphere both haunting and surreal. As the ritual progressed, the temperature dropped sharply. A cold wind swept through the cemetery, extinguishing 2 of the candles. Margaret quickly relit them, her hands steady despite the growing sense of foreboding. Then came the whispers. Soft at first, almost indistinguishable from the rustling leaves, but soon they grew louder, more insistent. They weren't random murmurs. They formed coherent sentences, taunting and accusatory. "You shouldn't have come here. Leave me alone. She belongs to me now." John clenched his fists, fighting the urge to flee. He focused instead on the photograph of Emily he had brought, holding it tightly as if it were a lifeline. Margaret urged him to stay strong, reminding him that the spirit feeding off the negativity would try to break his resolve. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. Dirt shifted violently around Emily's grave, as though something beneath the surface was trying to escape. Shadows danced wildly, distorting the shapes of the surrounding trees. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the chaos subsided. For a brief moment, everything went silent. In that silence, John saw her, Emily. She appeared translucent, her form shimmering like mist in the moonlight. Her face was peaceful, free of the anguish he had imagined haunting her. She smiled faintly, mouthing words he couldn't hear but understood instinctively. "Thank you, Dad." Tears streamed down John's face as he realized this was his chance to let her go, for real this time. Summoning all his strength, he spoke aloud, addressing the spirit of Mary Blackwood. "I'm sorry for disturbing your rest," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "But my daughter doesn't belong here. She deserves peace. Please release her." For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the figure of Emily faded, dissolving into the night like smoke carried away by the wind. The oppressive heaviness lifted, replaced by an almost palpable sense of calm. The candles burned steadily, their flames warm and inviting. When the ritual ended, Margaret and John packed up quietly, neither speaking until they reached the edge of the cemetery. "It's over," Margaret assured him gently. "Whatever was attached to her has been released." Though exhausted, John felt lighter than he had in months. The guilt and grief still lingered, but they no longer consumed him. He knew Emily was finally at peace, and so was he. Still, as he drove home that night, one question remained in the back of his mind. What exactly had he unleashed by opening that coffin? Though the immediate danger seemed to have passed, part of him wondered if the spirit of Mary Blackwood truly forgave, or merely retreated, biding its time. In the days following the ritual at the cemetery, John Harper felt a profound shift in his life. The oppressive weight that had settled over him since Emily's death began to lift, replaced by a fragile yet undeniable sense of peace. For the first time in months, he slept through the night without being jolted awake by nightmares or strange noises. The house, once suffused with an eerie stillness, now seemed quieter in a comforting way, as though it too was finally at rest. But even as relief washed over him, John couldn't shake the lingering questions. Had they truly banished whatever malevolent force had been tied to Mary Blackwood? Or had the spirit simply retreated, waiting for another opportunity to strike? He replayed the events of that night in his mind, the trembling earth, the chilling whispers, and most vividly, the fleeting vision of Emily smiling at him. It was hard to reconcile those moments with reality. They felt more like a dream than something tangible. Yet deep down, he knew what he had experienced was real. The diary itself offered proof. When he returned home after the ritual, he retrieved the leather-bound book from where he'd left it on the dining table. To his astonishment, its pages were brittle and cracked, crumbling into dust the moment he touched them. The cryptic messages written in jagged ink were gone, leaving behind only emptiness. Margaret Ellis had warned him that dealing with forces beyond human understanding came with no guarantees. Sometimes, she had said, closure isn't about answers, it's about acceptance. Those words echoed in John's mind as he tried to make sense of everything. Acceptance didn't mean forgetting Emily or pretending her loss didn't hurt. Instead, it meant learning to carry her memory with him in a way that didn't destroy him. Determined to honor Emily's legacy, John decided to channel his grief into action. He began volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring teenagers who reminded him of his daughter, young people brimming with potential but struggling to find their place in the world. Through art workshops and writing sessions, he encouraged them to express themselves freely, just as Emily had done with her diary. Watching their eyes light up as they shared their creations gave him a renewed sense of purpose. In helping others, he found solace, a reminder that while Emily's life had been tragically short, her impact lived on through him. Still, there were nights when doubt crept in. Shadows seemed longer, sounds louder, and the wind carried whispers that made him wonder if the past wasn't entirely behind him. One evening, as he sat alone in his living room, he noticed something unusual, a faint glow emanating from Emily's bedroom. His heart raced as he approached the door, half expecting to see some ghostly apparition. But instead he found her dream catcher swaying gently, catching the moonlight streaming through the window. Beneath it lay a small sketchbook he hadn't seen before, one filled with unfinished drawings and doodles. Flipping through its pages, he realized these must have been among Emily's last works. Some sketches were incomplete, mere outlines of ideas she never got to finish, but others depicted scenes full of hope, sunrises over hills, birds taking flight, and faces smiling warmly. Tears welled up in his eyes as he traced the pencil strokes with his fingertips. This was Emily's voice speaking to him again, not through cryptic warnings or spectral visions, but through her creativity. She had always believed in beauty and possibility, even during her darkest days. Holding the sketchbook close, John promised himself and her that he would keep moving forward, embracing life despite its pain. Her optimism would guide him, just as it had guided her. Weeks turned into months, and John slowly rebuilt his routine. He visited Emily's grave less frequently now, but each time he went, he brought fresh flowers and spent a few quiet moments talking to her. The cemetery no longer felt ominous. Instead, it became a peaceful place where he could reflect and reconnect. Occasionally, he thought he heard laughter carried by the wind, soft and distant, and he liked to imagine it was Emily playing somewhere nearby. Margaret stayed in touch, checking in periodically to ensure John was coping well. During one of their conversations, she mentioned something that stuck with him. Spirits feed off unresolved emotions. By finding peace within yourself, you've denied them the fuel they need to linger. Her words resonated deeply. John realized that his journey hadn't been just about confronting external forces. It had also been about facing his own guilt, fears, and regrets. Letting go of those burdens had allowed him to reclaim his life. As spring arrived, bringing new growth and renewal, John marked the anniversary of Emily's passing with a small gathering of friends and family. They shared stories about her, laughed at memories of her quirks, and released balloons into the sky as a symbolic gesture of letting her spirit soar free. Standing among loved ones, John felt a warmth spread through his chest. Though Emily was physically gone, her presence remained woven into the fabric of their lives, in the lessons she taught, the love she shared, and the inspiration she left behind. Yet, even as he embraced this newfound peace, John remained vigilant. He kept Margaret's number saved in his phone, knowing that if anything strange happened again, he wouldn't hesitate to call her. The supernatural encounter had left an indelible mark on him, teaching him humility and respect for mysteries he couldn't fully comprehend. He often wondered about Mary Blackwood, the woman whose tragic fate had intertwined with his family's story. Was she truly at rest now? Or was she still out there watching silently from the shadows? One crisp autumn morning, months after the ritual, John received an unexpected visitor at his doorstep. It was Sarah, Emily's friend from school. She looked older, more mature, but her eyes still held the same kindness he remembered. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, handing him a folded piece of paper. For everything you did? For Emily. Curious, John unfolded the note and read it. It was a letter Sarah had written to Emily shortly before her death, expressing gratitude for their friendship and promising to always remember her. At the bottom, Sarah had added a postscript. P.S. I'll keep looking out for signs of you, everywhere. John smiled, feeling a lump rise in his throat. She's still here, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the horizon. In all the little things we notice every day, in the sunlight breaking through clouds, in the sound of rustling leaves, in the laughter of strangers. She's part of everything now. Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Yeah, and maybe that's enough. As she walked away, John stood on the porch, watching the golden hues of dawn stretch across the sky. He took a deep breath, savoring the cool air and the quiet promise of a new day. Life was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes unbearably painful, but it was also beautiful. Emily had taught him that, and he vowed to live accordingly. Though the scars of loss would always remain, John knew he had emerged stronger, not because he had defeated the darkness, but because he had learned to coexist with it. He carried Emily's light within him, a beacon guiding him through whatever lay ahead, and as long as he held on to that light, he knew he would be okay.